All right, so now let's look at some examples of putting together your DOM, document object model, tags, and JavaScript. All right, so I started by creating just a very simple structure, an HTML page that has an image of your choice. I bet you didn't know that I was going to choose Stitch. And also I have an H1 tag on here. Very simple. Make sure that when you create these, intentionally, I have an alt tag. I have a width and an ID. So you want to include those because this is now an object, and an object has properties. So in our old days, we had an HTML tag that had attributes such as source, alt, and width. But now we're going to look at this as an object that has properties such as src, alt. So just different terminology, but we're going to be looking at it a little bit differently than we have before. All right, and so in our header, we're going to have an ID. We're also going to have a class, which I didn't put on here, but that was my intention. We're going to have a class, and it'll be heading. Okay, so it'll be heading. That didn't sound good. All right, so we have an image tag, an H1 tag. These are now objects, and these objects have properties. All right, so with that being said, let's jump over to W3 Schools. All right, so now we've looked at the window object, and we've seen that it has properties and it also has methods, and we've played with both of those. So I want to draw your attention to some other things that we're going to find here in properties. Like, for example, this word console. It says, instead of returning like this says, returning a Boolean true, this time it says it returns the console object. So here is us drilling down from window object to one of its children, or in other words, one of its console inherits from the window object. What I mean by that is, let's click on console. And when we look at console, let's look what it has. It is an object. The console is an object that gives us some things such as methods, things that we can do with the console object. Notice in this scenario, this object doesn't have any properties, but it does have some methods. In fact, this method that we've been using quite a bit. And so I'm going to access or utilize that method. So I'm going to comment out this window alert because I'm tired of seeing an alert box every time I open up or refresh my window. Now, when you are, as you notice, we had to kind of drill down, right? We had to start with the window object. And in order to get just like a file path in your computer, we had to drill down in the direction that we needed to go, meaning that we had to go to the window object. And the window object is how we found the console object. So there's a path there that we need to acknowledge. So when I clicked on the console and I got into the window, the console is an object of the window. Why am I being so specific about that? Well, in order to access any of the console's methods, we have to acknowledge the window object first, and then we use this dot notation. And in the dot notation, then we drill down into, well, we're specifically wanting to access the console object. And then we use the dot notation, which then says in the console object, there is a method. There is a method of the console object that we want to utilize. And the method we're going to use is the log method. And so inside that parentheses then is, what do I want to console log? I need a string in here to console log to our console. And so what I'll do then is I'll put console log hello world. Hello world. And so, and of course you could have clicked in here to get more information and seen the exact same thing that I had here. So let's go back into our page. I'm going to refresh the page. I'm not getting the alert. And where is the console log showing up? Well, if you go into your dev tools. So again, in this class, we're going to use either Firefox or we're going to use Chrome. So if you're using a different browser, this is your cautionary hello voice in your head that says, oh, I better switch to Firefox or Chrome. I'm going to right click and go into the inspect tools. And in the inspect tools, then I have a console. And so I'm going to click on the console, and that's where you're going to see that output. So console log comes in handy a lot of times when we're doing troubleshooting. And so this is one of those tools that you're going to put in your toolkit to help you work through things when your JavaScript code isn't doing what you think it's supposed to. So this is one of our tools. So it turns out that let's do one other. I'm going to acknowledge this document right real quick. So I'm going to go back and we're going to go back to the window object. And in the window object, we saw that console is in fact an object, and also document returns the document object. And so let's click on that. Now this one's a little bit more convoluted because for some reason they've put the objects, properties, and methods together, whereas in the window object documentation they were separated. But it's not a big deal because we can certainly glean from the syntax the difference. In other words, a property doesn't have parentheses because it doesn't have a series or a block of code that's going to be that's entailed in order to run that method. So methods always have the parentheses and properties have no parentheses. And so I want to look at this document write. Apparently, write is a method of the document. So let's scroll down and see if we can find that. So if I scroll down far enough, sure enough, write writes the HTML expression or JavaScript code to a document. All right. So if that's the case, and we saw that happen, we saw when we looked at our page that in fact we got a document write. Why is it then that I didn't have to put the word window here, but I did have to put the window here in front of console? Well, it turns out that I don't have to put the window here. Anytime that you are working with the window, you can eliminate that word completely. Because it's the original, it's the root, it's the source of everything else, the browser will assume window and then continue on. So that is the only exception to the rule. Otherwise, we have to pay attention to this drilling down, that the dot refers to the thing that it's attached to. This log is a method of this object. We don't have to, which is also an object of window, but we don't have to include that here. So these are both valid. Document write, which really under the hood is window.document write, and under the hood, this is window.console log. And so now we're starting to see a way that we can, we're getting hopefully comfortable with this whole concept of objects and properties and methods. And then we saw how we use it here in the console.